Welcome to the Calm Life School. This week we share a story that may gently challenge how you see work, family, and peace. It's a reminder that a fulfilled life is not built by speed, but by alignment. This is the story of Samy, 37 years old, a man who once chased the standard vision of success, but one morning he looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the tired, distant face staring back. He was living someone else's idea of success, and inside, he was slowly fading. After starting a small business that eventually closed, draining more energy than it returned, Samy was left with lessons, fatigue, and a quiet sense of unfinished purpose. He couldn't help but compare himself to an old college friend who had chosen a completely different path and was now visibly successful. It wasn't envy, it was the quiet pressure to keep up. A subtle, silent urge to prove that he too could achieve something visible, something admired. That quiet need to prove himself led him into a high-pressure corporate job, not for joy but to keep pace. It was the kind of role others admired, big firm, respectable title. But beneath the surface it cost him his evenings, his weekends, his laughter, his peace. He smiled at meetings, he made deadlines, but at home his eyes were heavy and his soul absent. He found himself becoming short with his children, distracted with Nora, and numb even during the moments meant for joy. He often lay awake at night wondering how he'd lost his way. It wasn't just the job, it was that he had stopped discerning whose voice he was listening to. His own dreams had been replaced by borrowed ones. And it wasn't until he saw how deeply misaligned he felt, despite the security and applause, that he finally said no to himself. One morning before the sun rose, he sat at the edge of his bed. He didn't cry. He just breathed deeply and whispered, "This can't be my life." That evening he sat down with Nora. No distractions, just truth. "And I know it means leaving your work, your friends, but I need to come back to us," he added. "I can't keep doing this," he said. "I'm not the husband or father I wanted to be. I'm always somewhere else. I don't even enjoy what I'm working for." Aunt Nora listened without interrupting. Then she said, "Then let's find our way back together." So they did. They sold the apartment, left behind the skyline, and moved not to escape but to return. They went to Samy's hometown, a slower town, a quieter place, a place where his father Adam still ran the old family bakery. Samy didn't rush into the bakery. He first found a job in operations at a nearby logistics company. It paid less, but the hours were kinder. It gave him time to walk to work, to eat breakfast with his kids, to breathe without guilt. But even that transition brought its own challenge. That first month at the logistics job was not easy. Samy found himself restless in the quiet moments, unsure of how to fill the space where urgency used to live. He struggled to slow his thoughts, to trust that he didn't need to prove himself every second, and in those silent gaps he would sometimes think of his old friend, the one who had succeeded quickly, taken risks, and seemed to flourish. For a brief moment, Samy would wonder if he had chosen wrong, but then he'd see Nora smiling in the kitchen, or his kids curled up with a book, and he'd remember their lives were different, their values were different. And he had finally stopped running towards someone else's finish line, looking for clarity. That evening, Samy sat with his father, Adam, in the bakery's back room after closing. The hum of the ovens had quieted, and they shared a small pot of tea. Samy opened up. "I'm still learning to slow down," he said. "Sometimes I feel like I'm missing something, like I should be doing more." Adam smiled. "You've done more in the last few months than you did in the last 5 years. Not more work, more living. That's what matters." Samy paused. "I'm not sure I know how to live without being busy." Adam looked at him with calm eyes. "That's the work now, replacing the habit of pressure with the habit of presence." That night, Samy sat down at the kitchen table with a notepad. He wrote out the habits he wanted to break and the ones he wanted to build. A daily walk with the kids, dinner at the table, not at the desk, one call each week to someone he missed. Not to be productive, but to come back to himself. Over time, these simple commitments rewired his days. His daughter began waking early to eat with him. His son joined him on evening strolls. Nora noticed he was more patient, more present. Even his breath slowed. And that was enough to anchor him. When Samy and his family moved to his hometown, he already had one quiet intention: to make life easier for his father. Adam, now 64, still woke before dawn to open the bakery, carrying the same habits and burdens he'd shouldered for decades. Samy saw the toll it was beginning to take and wanted to preserve what his father built without letting it wear him down. On weekends, he began helping Adam at the bakery. Not as a manager, but as a son. He swept floors, loaded trays, restocked flour. It was quiet work, repetitive, honest. He noticed how customers lingered, not just for bread, but for stories, for conversation, for connection. Adam didn't just sell loaves, he gave people a reason to return. After a few weeks of watching the daily rhythm, Samy gently suggested bringing in help. Adam hesitated at first, but after a few honest conversations over evening tea, he agreed. Together they found a reliable young man named Zane, who joined the bakery team full-time. It allowed Adam to slow down and focus on the parts of the work he loved most, greeting familiar faces, sharing stories, and mentoring Zane in the traditions he'd passed on for decades. Meanwhile, Samy began dedicating time to learning about long-term investing, not to chase wealth, but to build a secure and peaceful life. He wanted to understand how to use money as a tool for freedom, not stress. He spent evenings reading about financial planning, retirement strategies, and ethical investing. The more he learned, the clearer his vision became. He wanted to eventually retire early, stay close to his family, and be present in every season of his children's lives. It wasn't about quitting work, it was about working with purpose. In time, he transitioned to a remote consulting role with a financial firm that matched his ethics. He worked part-time, enough to support his family without sacrificing his presence. His weekdays transformed. Mornings with Adam, afternoons in his home office, evenings at home, no long commutes, no anxious Sundays, just rhythm. Nora too began to rediscover her own rhythm. She found herself drawn to gardening, a quiet task that brought her closer to the earth and gave her mornings of peace. What started as a few pots of herbs expanded into rows of vegetables and flowers, tended with care. The kids helped, the neighbors admired, and Nora quietly thrived. She didn't need recognition. She needed purpose. Her garden became more than plants. It became a space where she could think, pray, and feel the joy of growing something steady. With her hands in the soil and the sun on her shoulders, she found her place again, not through success, but through stillness. While Nora was finding peace in the garden, Samy was finding his voice again. He began writing again. In his own time, he started a blog called Flower and Fortune. It wasn't built for reach, just to reflect and reconnect. He shared stories of slowing down, of redefining wealth, of finding enough. Samy began mentoring local teens. He didn't talk about resumes. He talked about integrity, boundaries, clarity. He helped them ask better questions. Who do I want to become? What does success look like when no one's watching? His children began writing in a family journal, a living record of what mattered most. They wrote down prayers, hopes, lessons, and things they were grateful for. Samy added his own pages, so did Nora. It became their family legacy, not wealth, but wisdom. Later, he helped the town organize a town fair, simple booths, local crafts, homemade food, elders told stories. Children played barefoot on the grass, chasing laughter through the stalls. It became a highlight of the year, not because it dazzled, but because it belonged to them. Samy eventually partnered with the local high school. He created a mentorship bridge, where youth and elders taught one another, one sharing skills like gardening, carpentry, and baking, the other guiding digital tools, modern literacy, and creative confidence. It brought the town back together. One afternoon, Samy and Adam sat together outside the bakery. Adam looked out at the alley and said, "You've built something steady." Samy replied, "You showed me how." Years passed. The bakery still opened early, but Adam no longer carried it alone. Samy's children took turns helping in the mornings. Customers came and went, but the values remained: warmth, patience, honesty. Samy was later invited to speak at a university. The students had read his writing. They wanted to understand what it meant to build a meaningful life. He stood quietly before them and said, "I don't have a formula, but I do have one belief. If your success makes you invisible at home, it's not success. Peace isn't passive. It's a decision you protect every day. Most of life is noise. What saves us is knowing where our quiet begins. I just listened when life whispered, and I chose to turn toward what felt whole." The room was silent, and then they applauded, not for him, but for the courage he modeled. So now we ask you, Where are you headed? What are you carrying that no longer belongs? What does peace look like? Not in theory, but in your home, in your work, in your heart. Samy's story isn't rare. It's simply a life lived with intention. And that's what the Calm Life School is all about. Live simply, live fully, live calmly. Thank you for being here. We share new videos every week. So if this one moved you, we hope to see you again in the next one.